Yes, good evening everyone, good evening members, and welcome to anybody that's listening on the YouTube channel and the meeting of today, which is Wednesday the 28th of July of the Licensing Committee. For the YouTube, my name is Bill Rose, Councillor Bill Rose, and I will be chairing the meeting. So we'll go straight to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. I have some names here. Do you want to read them out? Yeah. Have apologies for absence from Councillor Bohr, Councillor Mrs. Pell, Councillor Raymond, and Councillor Wright. Are there any other apologies?
Chairman, there are no further apologies on notice unless any other members on the Chamber are aware of any other apologies that are required to be given this evening.
Thank you very much. If there are no more apologies, I'll proceed to item 2, which is declarations of interest. To declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interests, or non-pecuniary interests related to items on the agenda, having regard to the code of conduct for members and having taken appropriate advice when necessary before the meeting. Does anyone wish to declare an interest? No? There are none. Thank you. As there are no declarations, I'll proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 26th of May. A copy of the minutes have been previously circulated. If you have all those. Members, can I invite someone to move the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record? Moved by Councillor Hewson, and can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Beavis. Thank you. Thank you very much. The minutes have been moved and seconded as a correct record. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you very much. That is unanimous. So the minutes are approved. So I will just sign the minutes as a correct record. There are no issues from the minutes, members? Any wishing to speak? No? Fine. Thank you. Agenda item 4, members, public question time. Members, I have no registered speakers for question time. Is that correct, Emma? So we are no registered speakers?
That is correct, Chairman. No public speakers for this evening. Thank you.
So I will proceed then to item 5, which is the Business and Planning Act 2020, and it's on your agenda on pages 5 to 9. So what I'd like to do is to call upon John Millings, the Principal Licensing Officer, to present the report. John, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can see before you, the report is to brief the Licensing Committee on the amendments that have been made to the Business and Planning Act, specifically regarding pavement licences. As members be aware, this was introduced obviously to assist businesses during the COVID pandemic, and the government has decided to obviously continue this to 2022. And obviously, because of that extension, we needed to make further amendments and recommendations that are before you specifically to deal with the extension of the date and also changes to conditions that are attached to the pavement permits. So the key points are that all applications, what's agreed this evening will be relevant to all applications applied for at this date. After this date, it won't be retrospective to the applications that, or the permissions that are already in place. So the recommendation set out to continue with the existing application fee of £100, to agree the standard conditions with the amendments that are detailed later on in the report. And these amendments to the conditions are to deal with the extension of the lifespan of the legislation that was brought in to allow us to have the pavement permits, and also to address some concerns that have been raised regarding the impact the pavement licences can have in the surrounding area, and they're detailed further in on the report. And obviously to agree the officer scheme of delegation that's outlined. So the report is quite lengthy and has a variety of information in. I won't go through it in its entirety, but if members have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I'll get used to it. Yes, thank you, John. Do any members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Euston?
Thank you, Chairman. Just one simple question. I think the pavement licences, it seems to be is primarily pubs and restaurants and things. And I noticed that some pubs where they're directly onto the pavement, they've got the tables and chairs outside as expected, and they've put canopies up, and those canopies are permanently bolted to the ground. Is that permitted? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I answer that, Chairman? Yeah. So,
Don't that one, John. Thank you.
yeah. So the key thing to remember is that the conditions stipulate that all the furniture has to be removed at each time. So and when the applications are made, they detail the extent of the furniture that will be involved on the public highway. The key thing there is that if they obviously extend down from above, they will be incorporated into the plans and obviously get consulted on and then ultimately determined. And it's quite common that these applications are received and the plans are amended during the application process to accommodate the various consultees' concerns. So the short answer is yes, they are taken into consideration.
Thank you, John. Do you wish to come back on that, Councillor Euston? Or?
No, that's fine,
Thank you. Any other member have a question? Councillor Beales.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's fairly quickly to answer, and I may have just missed it in the report, John, so I do apologise. But it was, I can't find the bullet now, but it said there were no complaints about nuisances apart from the one that was previously reported. And when I read that, I thought, I must have seen that somewhere. I can't think where it was in the report now. See if I can find it now. It's just when I was reading it earlier on today, I thought, oh yes, here it is, 7.4.5. The licensing team have not received any complaints with respect to a nuisance arising from a business that holds a pavement licence. However, the original concerns remain. Can you just refresh me what that was?
Yeah, so it's just regarding the length of time that the pavement permits are allowed to go on for. So I think the key thing to understand is that there have not been any complaints because of the restrictions that are currently in place and the time limits that we've allowed these licences to go up to. So I think that's what the report's referring to, not necessarily a specific one. And the concerns that have been raised that don't specifically relate to nuisance have been looked into by officers, and ultimately some of the conditions, as you can see from the report, have changed to make the licence holder responsible for the clean-up, specifically regarding the pedestrianisation area and the amount of money that's spent on that, that if there is damage or that it becomes the responsibility of the holder to clear up as such.
Chairman, can I just also add to that?
Also, the condition that they're particularly looking at is for the terminal hour 2,200 hours. There was some approaches by businesses to the licensing team who wanted that to go beyond 2,300 hours. But what officers were conveying is that actually the concerns which originally brought in the original condition of 22 hours still remains, because obviously there's a point where you start to get into antisocial use of, just because you are simply out on the highway. So the officers have reflected on, should actually we take this as an opportunity to increase it to 2,300 hours, in line with what some of the people within the trade are wishing, but because obviously there's still this overall concerns around activities after 2,200 hours, and it being consistent with all other permits issued, being the terminal hours of 2,200 hours. So because these pavement licences under this legislation was only ever designed to be an assistance to deal with a pandemic, and obviously that's been extended, we do have the other pavement permit provisions under the Highways Act where we've got slightly more flexibility. So this is purely just in relation to this specific regime. So it could have been an opportunity to extend that condition, the duration in that condition, but officers felt that the 2,200 hours has worked well for the last 12 months, and they haven't had significant cause to reflect on the terminal hour they've got. So that's why they're recommending the continuation of 2,200 hours.
Yeah, thank you for that, Emma. Thank you, John. Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Vegas, too?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I mean, that was really, really helpful clarity. And I will just say, I mean, I'm clearly from the sort of the rural north of the district, and, there's really not much going on, beyond sort of 9 o'clock at night anyway. It's really quiet. It's obviously we are still in the pandemic. So I think at this time, it's the right choice to make, actually, Chairman. Thank you. I would support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members have any questions on this agenda item 5? Andrew, Councillor Ensign.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a couple from the report whereby a lot of the licences that were or permits that were issued were for a smaller area than was asked for, and I presume we've got the ability to curtail that, because where I represent the town centre, I had quite a few come through, and it's quite a very quick turnaround because it's calendar days, not working days, so it's quite onerous on the team to make sure that they get representations back in time. Is there is it able to put a provision in that we say maintaining access for, say, emergency vehicles at all times? I'm thinking like pedestrianisation, because of the size of some of them that came forward, and they were extending onto the actual highway and ways through, and equally where another one that was on a pavement, there wasn't enough room for, say, disabled people to get out of their vehicles safely and allow passing pedestrian traffic not to be impeded. And the other one is the where we've got the terminal hour earlier, it would encourage the other route via the Highways Act, because what I'm wondering was, with the price of £100, they've got a whole year for that. Is that in keeping as a similar price for what we charge under the highways? Because obviously licensing is a non-profit making function, but at the same time it mustn't be loss making neither. I hope that's clear enough, Chair. Thank you.
The question is for the Principal Officer. Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll answer that in reverse because it might be easier. So the regarding the fee, my own personal thoughts is at £100 you are making a loss, but that's what we've got to work with. There is no leeway for that. We're charging the maximum that's allowed. It is substantially different from what a pavement permit would cost, but we still have our existing pavement permit holders still renewing the permits and keeping them in even though this facility is open to them, because there are advantages and benefits to the other system as well. But the key thing is this is a short-term piece from central government to allow businesses to recover and cope with the COVID pandemic. I can't see it going beyond this year extension, because basically you'd be creating a two-tier system doing the same thing. So I think that will definitely come to an end. So yeah, that's the answer to that. There shouldn't, well, I'd be fairly confident to say that there shouldn't be any of these licences issued where there is a problem regarding access pedestrian for people with disabilities using the area, and or vehicular or emergency access, because that is one of the key criteria and that these are assessed on. And from an officer perspective, the short turnaround of these is a problem, but as officers with experience of dealing with these pavement permits previously, we can see when an application will potentially be an issue, and you can sort of preempt that by engaging with the consultee earlier. But the reality is, it's a quick turnaround. We're managing the situation at the moment, and applicants are generally liaising and mediating with the different consultees to resolve the issue, and quite rightly. But if any member has any concerns regarding access, or that there's some problem or obstruction, then if it's reported back to us, it will be dealt with, because there shouldn't be any situation when these pavement licences are being issued in a situation where they cause an obstruction to emergency vehicles, or that's hopefully, but obviously in the case that they are, we will obviously deal with that as robustly as we can.
Thank you, John. Andrew, do you wish to come back on that?
No, that's quite clear. Thank you, Chairman.
John, I've just got one quick question myself. When the application comes in, presumably there are dimensions or some kind of description of what the applicant is applying for. Do we check it, or is there a regulatory authority that say, no, that's not right, but the police come back to us and say it's in the way or whatever?
Yeah, so we as the licensing authority, or the members of the licensing team, obviously assess the application, and we get a copy of a plan that they plan to use, but the consultees are also provided with that. So we as officers have lots of experience of dealing with plans and ensuring accuracy, but more so that one of the consultees is Essex County Council Highways, which obviously have a vast experience in this, and it's their remit that they're actually checking these for the things like Councillor Hensman has obviously raised already. So yeah, without doubt, they're being checked by officers and then further by the consultees that are part of the application process.
Yeah, that's fine, John. Thank you. What problem my question is, when people put in sometimes 2 metres becomes 2.5 metres, and we don't know that until we actually see it.
Yeah, without a doubt that does happen on all forms of licensing, but we as officers, and this comes back to Councillor Hensman's point regarding the cost recovery, we will actually go down and measure the site, because we realise the problems that can occur by, and the criteria that county use is literally to the centimetre, the requirement for access and for emergency vehicles and for pedestrian traffic.
If I just remind members that the report before you is just basically a fait accompli, because what the government has done is just extended the provisions of the Business and Planning Act for another 12 months. So you've already agreed the principle and the parameters. Unlike the Highways Act applications, where we had a lot of discretion to set out the parameters of the application, the Act itself actually details what can and cannot be taken into consideration, who can and cannot be consulted. So the purpose of the report is essentially to let you know that the statutory provisions have been extended for a further 12 months, because there was a sunset clause of September 2021 for this to come naturally to an end. but the government's obviously decided it is the appropriate thing to extend that because obviously the impact of the pandemic has continued. In terms of the fee, it's a statutory capped fee. We cannot charge any more than what the regulations allow. And so really it was just an opportunity to bring you the report to let you know provisions have continued, but also to get the confirmation that all our arrangements that were set up in August last year continues over for this period. But obviously it was a time to reflect on those conditions which were specifically to do with the managing the pandemic, because obviously as restrictions have been lifted, we can't impose a condition which is contrary to what the law requires in terms of tracking and tracing. So it's been an opportunity to just do a small tidy up. So some of the concerns that have been addressed by members were some of the conversations that you had when you looked at this application. But really, what we're seeking tonight is to make sure that we do have the authority to continue with administering this statutory process for the next 12 months for those applications which are now coming forward. Thank you.
Do any members have any more questions? Councillor Swear, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. In light of the report from John and also just the comments that have been added by Emma, I would like to move the recommendations as set out on page 5 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Emma and John, for your informative and detailed answers. So, members, the recommendation is set out on page 5. We have a member who has moved the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Johnson. Because you just that. Members, the recommendation as set out on page 5 on the agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please indicate.
Chairman, that is unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you, members. So the decision is unanimous. The motion has been approved. I will now proceed to item 6 on your agenda, members, which is the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Vehicle Policies creation of a working group. And this is on your agenda, covered by pages 10 to 12. And I call again on the Principal Licensing Officer, thank you, John, to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're probably all aware, this is a fairly new thing regarding the setting up of a working group. I think the best way to start is to add some context to it. So as you're all aware, we've recently had the taxi and private hire vehicle standards where we consulted on and got the thoughts of the trade, and there are a number of items out of that we considered adopting and changing our policy to reflect. As members or the older serving members of the licensing committee will recall, there's been lots of instances where members have requested things to be changed, policies that could be tidied up, or just a general feeling that the policies need updating to reflect the current times we're in. And as a result of that, what would normally happen is that officers would go away, write the new policies, and then bring them forward to members after consultation for approval. But you've probably heard me say this previously, but one of the key points is that when members are making a decision, they need to feel that their ownership of the policies and it's their policies, and that the decision making that's being made is a reflection of the policies and what they're saying. So the thoughts regarding this establishing of a working group is, just to be clear, this working group isn't, as the report points out, isn't a decision-making body. It's a way of officers engaging with members to get their thoughts on how they want the policy to develop and improve without the... it's difficult to explain, but it's all well and good me writing a policy to reflect the current changes, and members voted it through. But the bottom line is, it's your policy. The members need to feel that they've contributed to it, and that officers understand the directions that members want to take when they're formulating the policy. And this group, and what the report says before you, is that how the group will work with officers to formulate these changes into policies. And as you can see from the report, we're looking at a membership of a maximum of 5, and that the members will need to express interest to be part of this working group to Emma Wisby via email, and then the chairman, depending on obviously the expressions of interest, the chairman will work with Emma to finalise the final group as such, and then the details of how that group will work is obviously before you. But like as chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions rather than babble on anymore. But I think you get the general stance of what we're trying to achieve here, hopefully.
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, members, before I invite you to comment on this agenda item, the issues are set out in a summary on page 10. We had a meeting, as you know, on the 26th of May, and the committee approved a work plan for achieving compliance with the requirements of statutory guidance. And as the principal officer has just indicated, that it was decided that we would form a subgroup, members in the licensing committee, that's a licensing review working.
Chairman, I do need to interrupt you at that point. That's not a strict. There has been no decision to create a subgroup. This is what is before the committee this evening. On the 26th of May, this committee received the statutory guidance on conditions, which this committee said it would take forward with a work programme. As John has explained, and I do apologise to the Chairman, but I do need to be clear about this. The purpose of this working group is for members to have a direct engagement with looking at the policies for taxi and private hire licensing, not to look at the introduction of those standard conditions, because there's already a separate work programme which officers are working on. I will go a little bit further than what John's explanation was about the thoughts around setting up this group, because those members who regularly sit on drivers panel, which is where you probably see the implementation of these policies at most, have anecdotally sort of expressed concerns that it's rigid. There's the potential for making contrary to policy decisions, obviously based upon evidence that's before them, and we all know that is an uncomfortable decision for you to make, or you feel that the policy is not particularly tight in one area as opposed to another area, or it doesn't give you the flexibility or give you discretions, or they're just simply out of time, because some of these policies are of a great age. So the purpose of the working group is really picking up on some of those anecdotal conversations that we've had with members who have expressed a real interest in getting into doing some active work. I'll be totally honest about this. This is not a working group where members come along and just rubber stamp the work of officers. This is a group which I will be expecting members to actively investigate, suggest, research, come forward with ideas, because at the end of the day, this working group will present policies to the licensing committee to adopt, and these are your policies at which frame your decision making. With the greatest respect to the previous decisions of this committee, we've had a number of policies that come before this committee where we've expected to be a debate, some reflections, some alterations, and they have gone through with the lightest of touch and scrutiny by this committee. And I know that has then led on to some questions as to why things have happened. And it is uncomfortable in telling members that you have got the policy that you approved at the time. So what we wanted to do was to get members engaged with these policies in a way that they reflect some of your experiences, some of your questions, the realities of what actually we need our policies to serve, And we can't do that in a committee easily. That's why we're suggesting a working group, because the working group is not a committee of the organisation, so we can work more flexibly, which means you can sit in a working environment with officers where you can have a free, frank discussion to work up the policies, to go through your concerns, to bring forward things that you are aware of in other areas. I mean, for example, we have Mrs. Beavis, who sits with the LGA and has a great wealth of opportunity to extract information through the LGA. And we've got a number of members here who are very, very predominant in serving on drivers' panels, and we've got some newer members who've had a different eye onto what policies can mean. So this is why we thought it would be more useful to members to actually get in at a grassroots level and actually work alongside officers in creating this working group. So what I'm looking for is 5 really proactive members prepared to work alongside with officers. So when these policies are brought to committee for consideration and adoption, alongside the officers explaining the outline and framework of the policy and the intentions, members can then speak with knowledge and confidence as to why they believe this is the policy that is right for the organisation going forward. So I do apologise to interrupt you, Chairman, but I just wanted to make that absolutely clear. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your report, John, and thank you, Emma, for your in-depth clarification of the summary of issues. So thank you for that. Members, you have the agenda item in front of you. Do any members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Beavis.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to John and to Emma for that helpful summary. I would like to move the recommendation to form a member and officer working group known as the Licensing Policy Review Working Group, or its acronym. I would just like to add that last evening we had our first meeting of the Planning Enforcement Reference Group, and it started at 5 p.m. and it finished just around 7:30, and it was absolutely excellent. The presentations were superb. We had a brilliant kind of test and Q&A, and at the end of it, we've all been given our homework for the summer holidays, which actually chimes very nicely with what Emma was just saying. There's a lot that we need to do in terms of reading local, reading national, reading comparable council policy. But we know at the end of it, as Gabrielle said, that the new chairman, supported by Councillor James Abbott, the vice chairman, that this is really from the bottom up, and everybody was really pleased. And I think this is timely. So I would be more than happy to move the recommendations, Chairman, and support the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beavis. Any other members wish to speak on this? Councillor Hensman.
Yeah, I think Emma's kind of answered my question in that it would be interesting to know how many panels were undertaken, whereby how many decisions were made contrary to policy against those that were not. Because I recognise officers' frustration as well as some members' frustration in that the policy is there, it's very clear, you have to draw the line somewhere. So if it's 5 years, we'll let it go to 5 years and 1 day. Well then if you let it 5 years and 1 day, you end up slipping 2, 3, 4, eventually 6 years, and what's the point in having the policy? So I guess those members who express an interest and subsequently become a part of it would have the opportunity to explore that, rather than say to the officers, can you tell me at committee how many?
Thank you, Andrew. Do any other members wish to speak on this item?
Chairman, if I just may answer that question by Councillor Hensman. Yes, that's part of the research that we would look to in scrutinising our current policy position, because also we need to know where we are and where we want to go to. and it's some of those, and it will help to iron out where we believe our policy does not give us the ability to work in a certain direction, or where the policy is actually correct. And as Councillor Beaver says, you know, we can look to compare how we sit with other authorities. We can look at how we sit alongside sort of the national position on those things as well. And that will be part of the research which we should go through in saying, actually, this policy is robust because you know, we've done these assessments, or where we'd like to make changes, and the evidence for making those changes is set here, because as we know, all policies should have a good evidence base as to why you wish to do something, because ultimately any policy can be challenged by a judicial review, and if you can't demonstrate that you've properly considered your policy, then that challenge is likely to succeed. So we do acknowledge our policies are of an age. They probably do reflect times which have significantly moved on, and also we've got a fundamental change of policy regard with the climate change strategy, which certainly has been mentioned by Councillor Swear in some of our conversations around vehicle standards, etc. So there's a lot of things that we need to be looking at going forward, and part of the work will be doing a health check, having regard to our umbrella policies of the organisation, how these policies sit within, and then obviously how they sit within the legal framework which we discharge the duties as the licensing authority. Thank you.
Members, it's clear that this is quite an interesting item, one that which members may like to become involved with. So you've got the agenda item there, food for thought. So there is a recommendation from Councillor Beavis to move the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Henson. Thank you. Members, the recommendation as set out on page 10 of the agenda have been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please indicate.
Unanimous, Chairman.
That is unanimous. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. The motion has been approved.
Chairman, before you take the next item, those members who wish to give an expression of interest, please can you either email me or the Governance Service email account, and then once we have all interest, I will then meet with the Chairman to determine the membership. Chairman, I believe Councillor Swear's got a question.
Councillor Swear, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point of interest of potentially the working group, would it be possible to give an indication of the times? Because I've got several other commitments, but I would be interested in participating in that working group should it be considered.
Okay. But for the benefit of board members, at the moment we've not yet set a timetable, but one of the things that I will look at with Councillor Board was the members who put their names forward. I make no bones about it. What I'm looking sure that I've got members who are available, because obviously the working group needs to be available, but also those who maybe have a particular line of expertise, experience, but we've not set the timetable. I do acknowledge that all of you have got very different commitments in life, not just inside the council but out, so we will hope to work in a way that those members who are selected, we will work with your diaries going forward. And as it's a working group, obviously we can work in teams, so we don't necessarily have to all come together, but obviously there'll be times where it may be beneficial to do that. So we are looking at the most flexible way, but we've not set a timetable at the moment. So we will take that all into consideration when we get the expressions of interest. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Councillor Swear, is that if you look at page 11, the next steps, it is there, but we haven't got down to the timetable yet, but it will appear.
Yeah, I saw that, Chair.
Thank you. I will now proceed to item 7, Licensing Committee Update. And I don't know if John needs to present his report. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As most of you will be aware, that the committee required some time ago that an update is listed for members that don't get the opportunity to obviously attend all of the drivers' panels and hearings we hold, and that's before you now, and also details some of the work we do as the licensing team and the changes to legislation. So I'll deal with the headers, and obviously if members have specific questions about any topic, I'll be able to answer them. But first of all, it's the hearings we've been holding for drivers' panel regarding Hackney Carriage and private hires. These are deliberately kept vague because some of the hearings are held in private and the information is confidential. The Licensing Act hearings, there's been only the only one new premises licence application, and this is expected. Obviously, the current situation we've been in recently and are still in has affected licensing dramatically. The amendment that was made to the Licensing Act Order 2021 regarding the European Cup final, that's obviously been and gone, but the government acknowledged that licensed premises would like to stay open longer if England progressed to the final, which they obviously did, but were unsuccessful. The face-to-face right-to-work checks is relevant to us, although it stipulates for employers we have a duty under a variety of different licensing regimes that require us to do right-to-work checks, and they've been allowed to be dealt with remotely, and it's been extended to the 31st of August 2021. We have already started doing face-to-face checks again. We're doing them now. So although that's been put in place, we feel that we can manage the situation appropriately to still conduct face-to-face checks. You may have heard the government launch the action plan for animal welfare. This obviously, since we've become responsible for animal welfare licensing under the Animal Welfare Act, this has a great impact. We're still not... This is more of the government's overarching strategy to deal with animal welfare, and we fully expect DEFRA to make changes to the licensing regime that we're currently operating under. Regarding enforcement action, we've conducted joint scrap metal visits with the police. This is something that unfortunately was put on hold during the COVID pandemic, but we've started doing the checks again with Essex Police. Unfortunately, one of the big increases is the action we're taking regarding animal welfare, and we've been involved in several large warrants regarding puppy farms. There's obviously a summary of COVID compliance work and the easing of the coronavirus restrictions that I'm sure you're all aware of, but I won't go through them all individually. But like I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. We've also sent out an additional letter regarding surrendered Hackney carriage plate that needs to be issued again. We're expecting the responses to be collated soon and be presented to this committee again for allocation. As you may be aware, before the COVID pandemic, we conducted some work regarding quality restrictions on Hackney carriages, and the trade were sought their opinion, and then we were going to progress that piece of work. That unfortunately was placed on hold, but we're now in a position where we will be reinstigating that piece of work. Just as a point of interest, the Department of Transport provided us almost unlimited face coverings for taxi and private hire drivers. I think they're ultimately clearing out their stock, but we've taken an allocation and are distributing them as and when we need, and if they run out, which I dare say they will, we'll obviously apply for more. And that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the update. Obviously, as I've said, if members have any questions or want any clarification, I'm happy to take them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Members, I should have issued guidance to you to say that this report is set out on pages 13 to 18, but there's obviously so do any members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Van Dolken, will you hand up first?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, may I just ask two quick questions of John, as I'm a relatively new member here. When you're talking in 3.11 about minor variations to premises licences or full variations, could I just ask what these tend to be? Is this just hours of work? Does it tend to be hours of operation?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. They are what they say. A full variation is almost identical to applying for a new premises license. So that it is a significant application. The cost and implications are almost identical to a new. It's just that the benefit for a premises applying for variations, as opposed to starting again, is their entitlement that they've got already remains, and we and yourselves as members, if they were asked to make decision, are dealing with the variation. So minor variations are, although it's called a minor variation, they can be significant. Basically, they're things that don't impact on the licensing objectives, but still need to be amended. So, for instance, changes to the plan that don't necessarily affect the size. So a refurbishment's a good one. It is possible to use them to remove conditions that are no longer relevant, but it's not normally done because the conditions are there because they affect the licensing objectives. But the minor variation, the key difference is, as opposed to the full variation that, as I've said, is a 28-day consultation and the fee is similar to a new premises license, it's a very light touch process. It's 10 days. A white notice goes up, and we as officers choose who we consult with if we believe it will impact something that, i.e. the police or the fire brigade, may be of interest in that we may not be aware of. So the best way to think of it is it's a light touch. It doesn't involve the licensing objectives, the licensable area, anything like that. But anything beyond that, it's redirected to a full variation.
Thank you. And could I just ask my second question very quickly?
Certainly, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The right to work checks. Do these only apply to licensed premises or taxi drivers, hackney drivers?
Yeah, so gradually the government so the short answer is it includes both of those. So individuals regarding licensing act application and individuals regarding taxis and private hire, drivers' licenses. The thing to remember is that the government has gradually introduced over time that they've identified that we are in a unique position to sort of double check, the employer's under a legal duty under general legislation, whereas we have this second opportunity to just double check that, and that's exactly what we do now, and it will ultimately gradually come across all forms of licenses, I would think, but they are covered.
Do you wish to come back, Richard? Or? Okay. Councillor Beavers, your question, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy for a written or an update at a later date. But I'm interested in item 6. The government launched the action plan for animal welfare, and then it gives the key areas, and then it tells us about the enforcement action. And I have to be honest, I wasn't really, and I would consider myself one of the more experienced councillors, I wasn't really aware that Braintree did all of that in partnership with the police and the RSPCA, and with my knowledge of both, I'm like, oh, that's good then, because one would assume they're doing a great job. But what's your role? I mean, I do get a lot more through my email box now on animal welfare than I've ever done before, and I just, at some stage, maybe just a bit more of an update. I think is what I'm asking for.
Yes. Thank you. Do you want to take that one, John, or is that?
Sorry, Chairman. Yeah. So basically, it's something we, as a licensing team, have only taken over since the changes to the Animal Welfare Act and the licensing regime in 2018. Where historically, it was dealt by another team, but not to as bigger extent it is now. Sorry, it's something we do. The key thing is we cover all aspects now. So we deal with dangerous and wild animals. We deal with breeding, home boarding, horse riding establishments, pet shops, zoos if we had any, but we don't. It does cover a wide, and it does cause problems because obviously that knowledge that's now required in the team is hard to obtain, it is a challenge, but it is something we do and something we take very seriously now, and obviously, especially recently, we're getting far more support from other agencies, i.e. the ability to serve warrants and deal with problem premises as they occur. So it's something we do. I'm happy to discuss it or send through. I think when we first did, one of the best ways to obviously an introduction into what we do is that the committee report back in 2018 must have been presented to members to show this is what we are doing now and this is what and how we plan to do it. So. Good.
Chairman, if I just may add to that as well, is with the animal welfare legislation, it's actually the duties which are set out for the local are actually been delegated down to officers to discharge. So that's why it doesn't come before members, because a lot of it is around the licensing and the enforcement licence, which is then through the courts and other arrangements. So that's why it's not a piece of work that members will be so au fait with, as with the Licensing Act or the Gambling Act or Driver's Pound. So it's fundamentally a function of the organisation which is discharged by officers. The animal welfare legislation itself is not the most easiest piece of legislation for anybody to work with, because it originally came in 2006. And then it came in incrementally through regulations. And then a couple of years ago, we had regulations that sort of provided a huge change of duty to district councils for licensing of mainly kennels and animal welfare.
I remember the kennels covered as a big thing. But it just seems to me that there's a bit more going on than one perhaps realised. But
So,
if it's a discharge, then, and it's in the update, that's, keep it there, please.
Yeah, so certainly it's something that officers, through their update reports, will notify members. But in terms of your participation and dealing with these types of applications, it is a licensing function discharged by officers on your behalf. Unfortunately, this is an area, because of the nature of the work that the enforcement work office has been doing, it is elevating on all district councils' front, particularly with puppy farming, etc. It's been an area which I know John has spent an awful lot of time doing work with. But just to rest assured members, it's not something you've been excluded from. It's just the nature of the work. It's discharged by officers. As you know, members are not involved with all matters. John has made reference to the dangerous wild animal legislation. That's probably one of the areas of animal welfare legislation you get involved in. Very, very lightly, mainly because we don't have many licences issued under that piece of legislation. But I'm sure John, with support from myself, will keep members aware of any sort of issues around that legislation. The training that we have attended, which was initially delivered by Dogs Trust, wasn't it, John, a couple of years ago, it was all aimed at operational understanding of the legislation and the discharge. But there is a huge raft of DEFRA guidance on this, which I have to say is not the most clearest of readings. And it's caused some confusion across the board with regards to some of the licensing regime elements of it. But I'm sure as time progresses and activity increases, you'll get further briefings. But certainly the the action plan will be featured on future updates as it comes forward. It's just that it may not create any work for the committee going forward other than to be aware that it is there. But obviously if members do have any concerns about animal welfare issues in their wards or as approached by licensing committees, please refer all those inquiries to the licensing team and they'll take those forward for you in the normal way.
Thank you for your report, John, and for your clarifications, Emma. Joanne, do you want to come back on any of those? Yeah. Fine. Do any members have any further questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. To John, I think, if you were asked to explain in detail what a licence is for, I'm not being pedantic here, I know what they're generally covering. Now I'll tell you, I'll lead on to the next part of my question. We've got more and more people moving out into the countryside, which I understand is correct. So there's more and more recreational activities which people are becoming involved in. Now I can only speak of activities which recently have been having complaints about. This probably doesn't cover your team. For example, cycling events. Now we have an awful lot of cycling events, whatever they're for, charity, etc., in and around the back roads, which at the moment are extremely dangerous with the height of the verges. There was one I witnessed last weekend, which I had a number of complaints about. People just couldn't pass the cyclists and cars, etc. Clay pigeon shooting. Don't apparently need a licence for it. Numerous complaints. They just seem to set themselves up. So if I said a licence is for what? I know what it's supposed to do, but how would you... Somebody said, can you prepare a paper and explain to me, who I know nothing about licences, what it's for? Do you understand what I'm trying to get to? Not being pedantic.
As long as there's not a right and wrong answer. I'll try. So the general principle is there's something with an element of risk or that could cause problems, and that the government, in its wisdom, chooses to regulate it. But to come back at you as such, that I can list off numerous things that, in my opinion, should require a licence that don't, and it's difficult. The way I look at it is that a lot of these things, once you speak to the right people or know who to speak to, can be dealt with through other means. You know, the fact that there's not a licensing regime to cover, and I can imagine, I find it bizarre that you can organise a cycling event and not need some sort of permission to do that, because the risk must be massive. Because if you come across these, you know, as just a normal driving along the road, you sort of don't really know what to do safely. So I fully appreciate that, but like I said, you know, there must be something. The clay pigeon shooting, the answer is normally regarding statutory nuisance, because clay pigeon shootings at a certain time of year continue, depending on their length, how loud it is, and all things like that. You can deal with it that way through abatement notices, things like that. I'm not sure. It's not my responsibility, so I don't want to talk for another team and say that they'll deal with it. But the reality is, all of these things that there's a high risk and cause complaints of can normally be hopefully dealt with. The cycling ones probably stumped me, actually. I'd like to think you would need to involve the county highways, purely because of, but I suppose as long as they're adhering to the restrictions of the roads. So I can't really... I've not answered your question at all, but basically I fully appreciate where you're coming from, but, you know, I think the best way is to try and approach it from a different angle, rather than try and shoehorn it into somewhere where it doesn't fit. There is, you know, it may change in the future, I'm not sure, but sorry.
I think as well, Chairman, just to support John on that, I mean, long members of this committee will be aware that the Licensing Act 2003, when it came in, the activities that it originally covered are not the same as today. It's been watered down. And when the Licensing Act first came in, people thought it was only doing with the sale of alcohol. Now, it brought together a number of licensing regimes. It got rid of the Cinemas Act, it got rid of some of the sex establishment provisions. So it's really hard to say describe what a licence can do, because depending on what regime that we're dealing with, depends even on the nature of the licence. So, you know, we have some regimes which are permits, which are not quite the same as a licence. So it is a really, really tricky area. All I would say to you is that if you do have activities in your areas and people say, well, I don't know if I need a licence for this or not, I really don't know where to go, then the first protocol I'd suggest is speak to the licensing team, because they will tell you if it's something that falls within their area of responsibility, or what this authority grants licence, or we will signpost you to the county council if it is something that they deal with. But in terms of could you write a paper describing what licensing is, all I'd say to you is that Popperson's, which is our Bible on licensing, runs to about 1,000 pages. So it's not something that we can easily condense down, but what we can do is answer queries as to, does this need a licence? How do I go about it? Or I'm going to run an event. I'm thinking about doing this at this event. What do I need to get from Braintree District Council to get to it? Because just using your example of a cycling race, we don't regulate the use of the highway for the cycling event. But if they want to have a bar at the beginning or the end, then certainly they need to get a licence from the authority if the premises doesn't have one. If they want to run a charity collection or anything like that, then again, that's something that John's team would be involved in. So sometimes we've got to look at the event to then be able to give the advice. So people really need to be clear as to what it is they're trying to achieve, so to make sure that John's team can say, yes, this you're going to do all these things, these are licences, these are all separate regimes, there's different processes, applications, deal with it. Yes, it's going to be confusing because you're speaking to the one authority over several licences, but it's the nature of the beast. There's not a one-stop shop. So it's a very broad area, hence having the size of the team that we do have and the support that we have in the organisation. So sorry we can't give you a quick guide to licensing.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Hilton, on that one, because I think John might be able to bear me out. If you come into the district with a circus or a fun fair, you may require a licence. I don't know. I know there's a difference between a licence and a permit. I mean, in my ward, on Boxing Day, they have a run. Mad as it is, but they do. They have about a 5-mile run. But they apply to the highways, have the road closed for an hour or 2 hours. It's not actually licensed as a permit, I believe.
No, that's a temporary traffic order, and depending on what legal framework it's made, it could be the district council, or it could be the county council who determines that application.
Yeah. But John was able to tell us when they had the cycle race that went through Finchleyfield a couple of 3 years ago, part of the Tour de France, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, we
would have had a licence for that, wouldn't it?
we had lots. Sorry, Chairman. We had lots of involvement in that, but not through the licensing of the event. As Emma has suggested, we licensed all the street traders. We were dealing with keeping the roads clear of these street traders and the charity collectors and things like that. So it was as I can see from Councillor Hilton's question, that was a very well organised event where there are obviously events you come across for as you're driving and you think, this is dangerous and, how is it allowed? So it's just a case of we have a remit and we obviously can't go beyond that.
Thank you. It's exactly what Emma said, if they're selling beverages or whatever, and then John said they've got stalls along the route, then they may require a licence, but I think cycling up the country lanes probably doesn't cover that. But do you want to come back on any of those answers, Hilton, or not?
No, the reason for the question was I just get asked, what are you going to do about this? It shouldn't be happening, to that effect. You want a straightforward answer. So you can say, well, you can contact whoever you've got to contact. Well, they're no good. Well, it just doesn't help them. And I know what the answer was. But John, as a cyclist, or at least was, I thought would relate to to what's happening, because, you know, I think it's extremely dangerous. Not your remit necessarily. I wouldn't expect it to be. You've probably got enough on your plate, but it's just interested me because there are going to be probably more and more of these things happening as more and more of us move out to the countryside. It's a different world in the countryside. Thank you.
Emma, can you come back on that?
Chairman, the only thing I would say is nobody can come to this authority and say, I want you to stop that licence. There's a process, and it's all based upon the public looking at public notices. So if there is an event that requires a permit, a consent, a road closure, and they see the notice, then they need to read the notice and then respond, because once those licences are granted, once the consents are granted, there's nothing that can be done. So I understand that sometimes constituents come to members and say, well, this is going on, it's going to cause all sort of confusions, kerfuffle, it's going to conflict with what other things going on in the village. But if they've missed the opportunity to comment on any consultation process that goes along with those consents licences, it's unfortunate, but they've missed their time to speak out and raise their concerns. So I always, you know, it is really, really regrettable when people don't see these public notices, but if they do read them and then don't raise their concerns, then that's a lost opportunity. Notices are displayed in a variety of ways depending on what the regime's required, but if it's already been granted, then really there's not an awful lot that can be done. But that's not to say that they shouldn't raise their concerns with the appropriate authority to get that confirmation that either time has passed or whether the concern is so significant they may be able to release stuff. But 9 times out of 10, the decision's already been taken and it's irreversible. I know members, when we've had licensings granted under the Licensing Act, members of the public have found that they've been unhappy. You know, there are regimes to be able to deal with those licences, but not just because they're unhappy about it. So it's like everything, there's a process. You don't participate in that process, you have to accept the outcome.
Thank you, Emma. Do any other members wish to speak on this item? Peter? No? It is a recommendation that this report is noted. Is there a member who wishes to move the recommendation? Councillor Beavers. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Bolton, thank you. Street racing. Yeah. Members, the recommendation that's set out on page 13 of the agenda has been moved and seconded. Can I take it that the report is noted? Please show of hands regarding the motion has been approved. The hand up, Andrew? Yes, thank you. Anonymous?
Chairman, the report's for noting, so there's no official vote on it. So members have noted the report.
Thank you, members. The report is noted. I'll now proceed to item 8, urgent business in a public session. Item 9, the exclusion of press and public, and item 10, urgent business in a private session.
Chairman, I can confirm there's no business to be brought under those 3 items, so you may proceed to conclude the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. As you heard, members, there are no urgent business in a public-private session for this evening meeting. That is probably the end of the business to be transacted by the committee tonight. But before I close the meeting, I would just like to pass my thanks on to Emma and the governance team, and also to the officers present tonight for arranging this face-to-face meeting, given the restrictions that we work under with the COVID-19 and government recommendations. So, Emma, thank you very much. John, thank you for your officers as well. And so this concludes our business for this evening. I close the meeting of the Licence Committee at 20:24. Thank you. Done.